Hey, this is Gerald with Cigar Ashtray, and today we're taking this little guy and making a mold. Alright, before diving into the nitty-gritty details, there's a few key things I want to cover first. This is going to be a much more complicated mold than the previous video I did on the Lost Skulls ashtray. First of all, this is going to be a two-piece mold instead of a one-piece. It's going to have a mother shell, that way I can save on material, and it's going to be designed for rotocasting. So to kind of give you an example of what I'm creating, it's going to be very similar to the mold that I use for my Inferno ashtray. And for those that are not familiar with it, this is my Inferno ashtray here. And as you can see, this ashtray is a lot like a cup. You can see that it's hollow inside. And that's what rotocasting accomplishes for us. And that's what this Octopus ashtray is going to be designed to do as well. So if I take the mold box for this particular ashtray, you can see the individual pieces here. So what I typically do is I go in and I paint the interior with the liquid. What I use is called Forton MG, or if it's resin, you can use different types of resin. But I mix it with metal powder, and I paint what's called a gel coat. So I'll paint the inner walls and let that dry. Once that dries, I'll piece everything together, tape it up so it's secure, and then inside here I'll fill it with my resin, or in this case Forton MG, which is like a gypsum product. And I don't fill it all the way up. What I do is I fill it enough that I spin it or rotocast it, so that as it spins, the material will start accumulating on the walls and eventually drying. And what that does is that gives us this coffee cup or vase type look where everything along the inside has dried, and it creates a hollow cast actually, so we can use it as an ashtray. I'm going to use the exact same process on this little guy here. First of all, this section right here at the very top is going to be cut away. What I want to do is just kind of design the pour spout for my mold. If I fill this with material when I'm pouring my cast down the road, I can sand it off, but that way I have a nice parting line of where the sculpture actually ended. Now, the first step to designing the mold box is deciding where to put the parting lines, or where to park the box. So in this case, ideally the best parting line will be down the center. Now, I typically do not like doing it down the face like this because it creates a seam line that causes me to have to do additional cleanup work and then the touch-up work as far as maybe painting to offset the color variations. But in this case, I really don't have a choice with this sculpture. There's an extra lip here, and if I was to do a parting line here, what would happen is when I pulled it from the mold box, I'm either going to tear my mold or I'm going to tear up this sculpture. So for this sculpture, what I'll do is I'll put a seam line here that runs all the way to the back, and those will be my parting halves. Now with this clay, it's a very soft clay. What I'm using here, what I sculpted this piece in, is a clay called Monster Clay, which you can see here. Now you can see it's very soft, very malleable, which is great for sculpting. It's very loose, very fast, but unfortunately when it comes to the finished product, you don't want to put your hands on it too much, or at least on parts of it that could get damaged, because it's going to leave fingerprints, it's going to smear your hard work. So what I've done with this piece here is I've actually put it in the freezer. I left it in there for at least an hour, and what that does is that hardens up the clay so that when I touch it, I'm not going to leave fingerprints on it. It doesn't become very sticky or too soft. It's hardened up for a period of time. Now you do want to be careful when you do something like this. Once you pour silicone and water do not mix well together, so you want to make sure it's dried off. As you can see, there's probably, I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but there's little beads of water after I pulled it out of the freezer, so I want to dab those off before I pour the silicone. But this is definitely a good step, or a good trick to make Monster Clay hard enough that it can handle the mold. Before making any mold, you need to make a mold box. The mold box is basically the container that holds both the sculpture and the silicone that I will pour into the box. For this project, what I'll need is basically a few key things. I use foam board, but you can basically use anything. You can use wood, you can use other types of thick board to make your box. Foam board is just inexpensive and it's easy to use. So I typically use this. I can pick up foam board for under $2 or somewhere around $2 at Walmart. So it's an inexpensive way to make the box. We're going to split this sculpture in half, as I said earlier. and the bottom half is going to be covered by a different type of clay. And the reason I do that is I just want to expose the portion that I want to pour my silicone half in. So to protect the other half, the half that's going to be covered by clay, what I want to do here is just wrap it in saran wrap, and that will protect all the detail work and prevent the two clays from basically getting merged or smeared into each other. But that's about it. So what I'm going to do is I'll do a time-lapse video on this as far as cutting the box, constructing it, and I'll do a voiceover kind of explaining what I'm doing as I go. And then once we get the box complete, then we move on to the next phase, which is actually just pouring the silicone. And that's the part where we're actually making the mold. Okay, now the mold box is complete as far as the first stage of this process. What we're going to do now is pour thin layers of silicone over the sculpture. You pour a thin layer, let it dry or let it get tacky, and then you pour another thin layer and just kind of slowly build it up. The goal here is to try to minimize the amount of silicone that's needed. If you look at this this ridge here, my hand's in the way, but if you look at this ridge, my goal is to keep all the silicone from this ridge back. And what I'll do is I'll just pour it in stages. These holes in the clay over here are actually going to be key. So what's going to happen is once we finish this side, we'll flip the sculpture over and we'll pour silicone into the other side, and we'll create locking keys with these holes. So the goal here is to just pour a thin layer, get everything to dry, and then we'll go over it after that with what's called a mother mold. Now you can use plaster or different materials, but basically what the mother mold does is it holds the silicone rubber in place. So instead of having to build an entire box, or like you saw with my Inferno mold, I can just build a thin layer and then build a shell or something to keep it in place with either plaster or some other type of material. Alright, I'm going to wrap up this video here, and in part 2 I'll go into detail on how to do the actual silicone pours and creating the silicone and mother molds. So if you found this video interesting or intriguing or just simply liked it, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to see more of my artwork, you can check me out on cigarartistry.com or on Instagram @cigarartistry. Until next time.